So after folliculogenesis, the next topic is menstrual cycle. Now what is menstrual cycle? It is the reproductive cycle in the female primates. Primates are monkeys, apes and human beings. So human beings are also considered as a primates, and in the female of human beings there is a reproductive cycle which is known as a menstrual cycle. So the reproductive cycle of a human female is known as a menstrual cycle. So now when we talking about the menstrual cycle, what is the meaning of menstrual and what is cycle? So this menstrual word comes from the menstruation, and menstruation means bleeding. So cycle, and the cycle means the repetition. So the female of a human goes a repetition of bleeding every month. So there is a bleeding every month in the female of the human being. So that bleeding every month, the repeated bleeding of a female every month is known as the menstrual cycle. Now the ideal duration of the menstrual cycle in human female, the menstruation is repeated at an average interval of around 28 to 29 days. It means the ideal duration of a menstrual cycle is 28 to 29 days. Now, the cycle of events starting from one menstruation till the next one is called as menstrual cycle. Means the bleeding, the time between the two bleeding is known as a menstrual cycle. So cyclic event occurring between the two bleedings is known as a menstrual cycle. Now we come to the average duration. The ideal duration is 28 to 29 days, but it can vary. It can vary up to 4 days. So it can be around 24 days. It can be up to around 32 days. So average duration of a menstrual cycle can be 28 plus minus 4 days. Now the one ovum is released. That is known as the releasing of ovum is known as the ovulation. So one ovum is released during the middle of each menstrual cycle. What does that mean? It is a reproductive cycle. So in this cycle, the female is reproductively active, and female is reproductively active means it is producing its gamete. So during this cycle, the female is releasing one gamete in the middle of each menstrual cycle. The first menstruation begins at the puberty and it is called as a menarche. It means the first menstruation of the female start at the age of puberty, and that first menstruation, the beginning of the first menstruation, this condition is known as a menarche. And the menstrual cycle ceases around the 50 years of age, that is termed as a menopause. What is it? When we talk about the female gamete producing ability, we talk about that the primary follicles which are present in the female at the time of a puberty are limited in number. We say that in each ovary 60 to 80,000 primary follicles are there. So if the female become active, reproductively active at the menarche or at the puberty, it continues to form gamete up to the age of 50 years, and after the 50 years all the primary follicles got exhausted. So she is not having any primary follicle. So after that, the female will not be going to produce any more gamete. So if the female is not be going to form any more gamete, then after that time we can call it a menopause. We can call that term as a menopause. So menstrual cycle that ceases around the age of 50 years because all the primary follicles will get exhausted and female will not be able to produce any more gamete. So the female will not be reproductively active after that. So that term is known as a menopause. Now, cyclic menstruation is an indicator of normal reproductive phase and extent between the menarche and the menopause. What does it mean? It is a reproductive phase between the menarche and the menopause, because the menstruation is occurring every month. The menstruation is occurring means female is producing gamete every month. So if the female is producing gametes, it means it is reproductively active during that time. So female is reproductively active between menarche and the menopause. So cyclic menstruation indicate the normal reproductive phase of a human female. Now in this cycle, the female body prepare itself for the possible pregnancy. If the pregnancy does not occur, then the body abort all the preparation and restart the preparation again in the monthly cyclic manner. What does that mean? We say that in each menstrual cycle, female is producing gamete, and that gamete is going to the fallopian tube. It went to the fallopian tube in expectation of getting fertilized. Means in order to get fertilized, this gamete is released by the ovary and it will go to the fallopian tube. Now if the gamete is fertilized, it will convert into the zygote, and that zygote will ultimately convert into the blastocyst. And I have already told you that a blastocyst is a multicellular structure which needs nutrition. So in order to get that nutrition, that blastocyst will attach to the wall of a uterus. So, to provide nutrition to the blastocyst, the wall of a uterus should also be get prepared in order to deliver the proper amount of nutrition. So, that is why the preparation of that uterus wall, the preparation of that uterine wall starts before the actual fertilization. So, in order to provide the nutrition, the wall of a uterus also prepare itself, and that is known as a particular preparation of the uterus wall. So, this is the cycle of the female body. In this cycle, the female body prepare itself for the possible pregnancy. Means if the pregnancy occur, the wall of uterus should also be prepared before the actual fertilization, before the actual pregnancy. And if the pregnancy does not occur, the blastocyst will not form. The fertilization does not occur, the blastocyst will not form. If the blastocyst will not form, the particular wall of a uterus does not give any nutrition to any particular structure. So the preparation that the uterine wall has already done will be getting abort after and abort the preparation and restart the preparation again for the next month cycle. So it is a monthly cycle in which the possible the preparation for the possible pregnancy has taken place. Now, pregnancy inhibits the ovulation. If the pregnancy occurs, so the pregnancy lasts for the 9 months, means pregnancy occurs only when the gamete get fertilized. So when the female is already having a fertilized gamete, the fertilized egg inside her body, she will not need any more gametes to particularly getting fertilized. When she is already having a fertilized gamete, she is under the pregnancy, she does not need any more gametes to get fertilized. So during the pregnancy, during those 9 months, female does not need any more gamete. That is why during the pregnancy, the menstrual cycle or the release of a gamete does not take place. So pregnancy inhibits the ovulation. Lack of menstruation can be due to. So one reason is the pregnancy, because in the pregnancy the ovulation does not occur, so the menstruation also does not occur. So lack of menstruation can be due to pregnancy. Some other factors are also there, like stress and the poor health and etc. Now, this is the particular schematic diagram, like it is a reproductive cycle. This is the first day, and from the first day this cycle begins and it will last up till the 28th day. So ideal duration of a cycle is the 28th day, and after 28th day the new cycle begins from here. So from here the new cycles begin. That is why from here the new cycle begins. So the menstrual cycle is the cyclic events which are occurring from one menstruation to the next menstruation. So between these two menstruation, whatever the events are occurring in a cyclic manner and repeated after every month, then it is known as a menstrual cycle. So this is the diagram which is showing that after 28th day the menstrual cycle will be repeated itself in a similar manner. So this diagram. After that, at puberty, what brings the changes inside the wall of a uterus and what brings the menstrual cycle in the female? So at puberty, some cyclic changes begins in the female under the influence of certain hormones. So this is the hormonal regulation which will bring about some changes inside the body of a female at the puberty. So at puberty, the cyclic changes begin in the female under the influence of hypothalamic hormone, pituitary hormone and the ovarian hormone. Hypothalamic hormone is mainly GnRH, gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Pituitary hormones are, or we can say the gonadotrophic hormone, or these are known as the gonadotrophins, and mainly LH and FSH. So these will and the ovarian hormone, estrogen and progesterone, these will affect the cyclic changes in the female body. Now these cyclic changes are seen in the female body at two places. First is the ovary and second one is the uterus. So the cyclic changes, the menstrual cycles bring about the cyclic changes. These cyclic changes in the female body are seen at two places, two structures, that is ovary and the uterus. Whatever the changes occurring inside the ovary is known as the ovarian cycle, and whatever the changes occurring in the uterus is known as the uterine cycle. Now what occurs inside the ovary? Ovary is having a follicle. So inside the ovary, the development of a follicle takes place, and ovary is a primary sexual organ which releases gametes. So the development of a follicle and release of a gamete takes place inside the ovary. Now uterus, the wall of a uterus is made up of a three layer: perimetrium, myometrium and endometrium. So I have already told you the endometrium undergoes cyclic changes during the menstrual cycle. So how does that periodic development and shedding of endometrium takes place? So during that particular, the changes in the uterus, if I talk about the uterus, this is the structure and this is the uterine structure, in which the outermost layer is the perimetrium. Inside this perimetrium, we can say there is a smooth muscle layer that is more, named as a myometrium. This is perimetrium, and the inside that we will find out the myometrium, and after that we will find some one other layer that is known as a endometrium. So this is the innermost layer which is known as a endometrium of the uterus. So during the menstrual cycle, in the uterine changes, periodic development and the shedding of the endometrium takes place. What does it mean? During the menstrual cycle, this endometrium undergoes changes. Mainly the endometrium undergoes changes, and during that the development of the endometrium takes place. Means it proliferates and it forms some more number of cells around it, and it will increase in the thickness in order to provide the nutrition to the blastocyst if the gamete got fertilized. So this is how the changes in the uterine wall takes place. So periodic development of the uterine wall, this uterine wall, the endometrium getting developed, and if the gamete does not get fertilized, this particular development, this particular changes in the wall again got abort. So these changes will abort. So the complete uterine wall that was made for the possible pregnancy will shed off and will break down. So this will, the breaking of this endometrium will lead to the bleeding, and that bleeding will occur in every month. So that is known as the menstrual cycle. So these are the two changes. Now, how does the hormone regulate the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle? Means how does the hormone will influence the changes inside the ovary and the uterus? Now, before starting this particular topic, I have made a flow chart of hormonal regulation. So you will understand that at the time of a puberty, the hypothalamus starts secreting certain hormones like GnRH. This hypothalamus at the time of puberty will release gonadotropin releasing hormone. These gonadotropin releasing hormone will go to the anterior pituitary and will stimulate anterior pituitary for the secretion of again two hormones. These are known as the gonadotropins like FSH and LH. So at the time of puberty, hypothalamus secrete GnRH, GnRH stimulate anterior pituitary, and anterior pituitary secrete the FSH and LH. It will release FSH and LH. These FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone, then go to the ovary, the primary reproductive structure, the primary sexual organ of a female. So under the influence of GnRH, FSH and LH are released and they will reach the ovary. When they will reach the ovary at the puberty, this FSH and LH brings about the changes in the follicle, because ovary is what ovary is having before the puberty. It is having 60 to 80,000 primary follicles. So this FSH and LH reaches the ovary and then they stimulate the primary follicles. The primary follicle that get stimulated and they will convert into the developing follicles like secondary follicle, tertiary follicle and mature Graafian follicle. So the FSH and LH stimulate the follicle will start developing, so they are known as a developing follicle. These developing follicle, I have also told you that the secondary follicle has a particular structure that is known as a theca layer, and that theca layer starts secreting one more hormone that is known as estrogen. So under the effect of FSH and LH, the primary follicle gets stimulated and converted into the developing follicle. These developing follicle then start secreting one more hormone that is known as estrogen. Now, what does this estrogen brings about? This estrogen basically have two functions. There is estrogen released by the developing follicle inside the ovary. Now, from here reaches the uterus and it brings about the changes in uterus, like it causes the formation of the endometrium. Means the development of the endometrium is because of the estrogen released by the developing follicle. Now, one more action of the estrogen is that this estrogen which was released by the developing follicle, it will go through the bloodstream and it will reach the hypothalamus as well as anterior pituitary, and it will give the positive feedback to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. When the estrogen is stimulating the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, the hypothalamus will release more amount of GH, and will come to the posterior pituitary and it will stimulate the anterior pituitary more, so that the amount of FSH and LH will continue to increase. Means ovary, and in the ovary FSH and LH for the first time stimulate the ovary for the stimulate the primary follicle, which will convert into the developing follicle, which will produce a estrogen hormone. This estrogen reaches the uterus and formation of the endometrium has started. Now this estrogen also reaches the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, giving the positive feedback. When positive feedback goes, the amount of FSH and LH increases. Means this estrogen is also responsible for increase in amount of the FSH and LH. Now the amount of FSH and LH when increases, the LH increases more and more in amount as comparatively to the FSH. Means estrogen mainly increases LH hormone. So after the development of a follicle, the estrogen is released, and this released estrogen will affect the increase in LH amount. Now when the LH reaches the peak value, when it attains the peak value, highest concentration, this is known as a LH surge. So estrogen is responsible for the LH surge. Then this LH will again go to the ovary, and this ovary, due to the LH surge, undergoes the ovulation. So the LH surge will lead to the ovulation. This LH surge, why the LH is increasing, why the LH is attaining this peak value? Because of the estrogen released by the the developing follicles. So estrogen stimulating the anterior pituitary for the release of LH, LH attaining the peak value. This peak value stimulates the ovary for the ovulation. Under the LH, effect of LH, the ovulation occurs, and due to the ovulation, the gamete releases and the corpus luteum formed inside the ovary. So this corpus luteum remain inside the ovary. This corpus luteum will remain inside the ovary. It will remain inside the ovary, and this gamete which was formed will go to the fallopian tube. It will reach the fallopian tube. This is how the gamete released by the ovulation will reach the fallopian tube, while the corpus luteum remain inside the ovary. Now after that, I have already told you that corpus luteum is a temporary endocrine structure. So this corpus luteum start releasing progesterone and estrogen hormone. So the progesterone hormone, mainly the progesterone hormone, because it releases highest amount of, in a high amount the progesterone hormone, in the small amount estrogen hormone. So the mainly the effect are because of the progesterone hormone. Corpus luteum from the ovary start releasing estrogen and progesterone after the ovulation, and this progesterone will reaches the uterus, and it brings about certain changes in the uterus. What are those changes? When the progesterone reaches the uterus, it makes the uterus secretory in nature by stimulating its endometrium. Means the formation of endometrium is done by the estrogen hormone, while the secretory nature of the endometrium is produced by the progesterone hormone. So after that making of the endometrium secretory, we can also say that progesterone also maintains the endometrium. So the maintenance of the endometrium is done by the progesterone, while the formation of endometrium is done by the estrogen. After that, this progesterone and estrogen combination, which was released by the corpus luteum, also have a regulatory effect. Like these estrogen and progesterone, similarly like the estrogen which was released by the follicles, these estrogen and progesterone released by the corpus luteum, this combination of estrogen and progesterone released by the corpus luteum through the bloodstream reaches the hypothalamus as well as anterior pituitary. And when it reaches the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, it is having a negative feedback. When it is give the negative feedback to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, the amount of FSH and amount of LH decreases. Why so? Because when we already get the gamete, and gamete was placed inside the fallopian tube, which was expected to get fertilized, when we already is having a gamete, we do not need any more gamete. When we do not need any more gamete, we do not need any more follicles to get stimulated. That is why we do not need any more FSH. Because if the FSH is continuously secreting, it will be providing more, it will be stimulating more follicle to provide more gamete. So when we are already having gamete, we do not need any more gamete. That is why the estrogen and progesterone produced by the corpus luteum go to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary and gives the negative feedback, and due to that the amount of GnRH, amount of FSH and amount of LH also decreases. So when the amount of FSH decreases, the amount of FSH is not significant, the effect of FSH is not significant on the ovary, and it will not stimulate any more follicles. So during that period, when the gamete is already placed inside the fallopian tube, the corpus luteum was still there, and it will lead to the negative feedback, which will cause the decrement, or which will cause the lower level of FSH. So this is the particular schematic representation. This is the flow chart for the complete menstrual cycle. And now we will come to the menstrual cycle. We will divided the menstrual cycle into the certain phases on the basis of the events occurring in the ovary and the uterus. So the four type of events which we can classify the menstrual cycle into the four phases. Now the first is the menstrual phase, or it is also known as the bleeding phase. The first phase of menstrual cycle is known as the menstrual phase or the bleeding phase. Now next, pre-ovulatory phase, because the main event of the menstrual cycle is releasing of gamete, that is ovulation. So the time before the ovulation is known as a pre-ovulatory phase, and then the ovulatory phase, when the release of gamete takes place, and the time after the release of gamete, the time after the ovulation is known as a post-ovulatory phase. So menstrual cycle is classified into the basically four phases: bleeding phase, pre-ovulatory phase, and the post-ovulatory phase. During the pre-ovulatory phase, before the ovulation, what we have seen, the effect of estrogen hormones are more. The effect of estrogen hormones are before the ovulation. So it is also known as a estrogenic phase. And during that time, the ovary, inside the ovary, the follicular development takes place. So it is known as a follicular phase. During that time, the proliferation of the number of cells of the endometrium takes place. Means the formation of the endometrium takes place. So it is also known as a proliferative phase. Then the ovulatory phase. After that, the post-ovulatory phase. In the post-ovulatory phase, we have seen that the formation of corpus luteum takes place inside the ovary. So it is also known as a luteal phase. Due to the corpus luteum, the progesterone hormone, the amount of progesterone hormone increases, and effect of progesterone hormone is more. So that is why it is known as a progesteronic phase. This progesterone will bring about the secretory changes of the endometrium. So it is also known as a secretory phase. So these are the four phases of menstrual cycle. Now we will come to them one by one. The first phase, that is the menstrual or the bleeding phase of the menstrual cycle. So what is occurring inside that? If we talk about all the changes, first is the hormonal influence. I have classified this particular cycle into the three different regulations: hormonal influence, and the effect of hormone on the ovary, and then the effect of ovarian changes on the uterus. So then the uterine changes. So the menstrual cycle, the hormonal influences, the amount of gonadotropins and ovarian hormone is considerably low. So in this cycle, the amount of gonadotropins, amount of hormones inside the body is low. Ovarian changes, since there is no particular hormone, there is no significant change inside the ovary. Why so? Because there is no corpus luteum inside the ovary, there is no significant structure inside the ovary. It already get degenerated. From the previous cycle we are talking about, the corpus luteum is not inside the ovary, it is degenerated. We are assuming that the corpus luteum is degenerated. So if there is no corpus luteum, there is no progesterone and estrogen. So the amount of progesterone and estrogen is low. So that is why, if the progesterone and estrogen amount is low, what will happen? The low level of progesterone and estrogen causes the breakdown of endometrial lining. Means the progesterone which was maintaining the endometrium, if the progesterone amount is low, it cannot be able to maintain the endometrium. So it causes the breakdown of the endometrial lining of the uterus and its blood vessels. So uterus, the lining of the uterus is also associated with the blood vessels. So the blood vessels also get breakdown. So which forms the liquid that comes out through the vagina. This is known as a menstrual flow, and this menstrual flow occur and it lasts for 3 to 5 days. So in this particular phase, around 40 to 80 ml of blood is lost per cycle. So this is the particular bleeding phase, because the bleeding is occurring, the blood loss is occurring, so it is also known as the bleeding phase or the menstruation. That is also means the bleeding. So the menstrual phase or the bleeding phase. This is first phase. Now we come to this particular diagrammatic representation. In this particular process, because there is no progesterone estrogen, this endometrium, which was the innermost layer of the uterus, will sheds and it will comes out with the particular, it will slog out from the vagina. So the endometrium shedding takes place inside the menstrual phase or bleeding phase. Now from here we can understand the menstrual phase. The part which is before the blue line is representing the menstruation phase. In this part, we can see that there is no follicle stimulating hormone and there is no luteinizing hormone. This is showing the pituitary hormones. So both the hormone, the level of both the hormone is less. I have already told that in particular the cycle, the menstrual cycle, the bleeding cycle, the hormonal level is low. So there is no luteinizing and the follicle stimulating hormone. When there is no hormone, there is no significant structure. These are the primary follicles which are usually present inside the ovary. So there is no significant structure. Now, when there is no significant structure, we basically come to the corpus luteum. This part is not having any corpus luteum. When this part is not having any corpus luteum, this part is also not having any progesterone and estrogen. So the amount of progesterone and estrogen in this part is also low. So when the amount of progesterone and estrogen is low, the wall of endometrium shed off and it will lead to the bleeding. So this particular part is showing the bleeding parts. This is showing the bleeding, and this bleeding is also known as the menstruation. So this particular region before the blue line is showing you the menstrual phase or the bleeding phase. It lasts for 3 to 5 days, and then after this phase we will come to the next phase, that is the pre-ovulatory follicular proliferative, or it can also be known as the estrogenic phase. It follows the menstrual phase and between 6 to 13 days. There is no fixed time, but we can usually say that in the ideal cycle around 6 to 13 days the follicular phase is going. So hormonal influence under this phase. In the follicular phase, under the influence of GnRH, now the hypothalamus become active and it start releasing the GnRH hormone. So under the influence of GnRH secreted by the hypothalamus, the level of FSH and LH increases and the ovarian hormone, basically estrogen, begin to rise. So I have already told you, when the GnRH stimulated by when the hypothalamus was stimulated, it will release the GnRH, then GnRH will reach the anterior pituitary, stimulate the anterior pituitary for the release of the gonadotropins FSH and LH. These FSH and LH will go to the ovaries, and from there it stimulates the follicles, the primary follicle, and the primary follicles start developing, and those developing follicles start releasing the estrogen. So this is what it is talking about. Now ovarian changes, the secretion of FSH LH from the anterior pituitary gland stimulate the primary follicle in the ovary to grow and become fully mature Graafian follicle. This stimulates the secretion of estrogen from the developing follicles. This is already we have talked about. Now uterine changes. Due to the estrogen secreted by the developing follicle, this estrogen leads to the regeneration of the endometrium. Due to the secretion of estrogen, the endometrium of the uterus regenerates or develops, or the formation of the endometrium starts. So through the proliferation, when we talk about the proliferation, the number of cells increases by the multiplication. So I have already told you that the number of cells are increasing, the thickness of the endometrium wall is increasing because of the estrogen. So due to the secretion of estrogen, this estrogen stimulates the wall of uterus, the endometrium, and the endometrium start the cell multiplication, and due to cell multiplication the proliferation of endometrium occur, and due to that the thickening of the uterine wall also increases. So estrogen is responsible for the formation or development of the endometrium and the increase in the thickness of the uterine wall. So this is all about the pre-ovulatory cycle. Now we come to the next. This is the diagrammatic representation of the follicular phase. During this follicular phase, the estrogen secreted by the developing follicle will lead the uterus, will lead the wall of a uterus to increase in size. So that is why here the thickening of the uterine wall increases. So development of a uterine wall takes place. So the thickening is slightly increased in this. Now the particular in this graph we will understand that before this line there was a menstrual phase. After this line we will see that the three phases from here to here we can consider. This is the follicular phase. This particular part which is shown in pink is the ovulatory phase, and after that is the post-ovulatory phase. So the follicular phase we talk about. After the menstruation, if we talk about, the amount of FSH and LH increases. The level of FSH and LH is increasing. The level of FSH and LH is increasing. Because of the hypothalamus start secreting the GnRH, and GnRH will lead anterior pituitary to release the FSH and LH. So in this cycle the amount of FSH and LH start increasing. Because of the increase in the amount of FSH and LH, the follicle stimulating hormone stimulate the primary follicle to convert into the mature follicles. So developing follicles, these developing follicles start secreting estrogen. So we can see that the amount of estrogen also increases, but the progesterone level is remain constant. So progesterone is constant, but the amount of estrogen is also increases during this phase because of the because of the stimulation of the developing follicle by the FSH and LH. Now, this estrogen will lead to the formation of the wall of a uterus. So that is why the thickness of the wall of a uterus, these are the uterine linings, these are the changes in the uterus. So if the estrogen increases, the thickness of the uterine wall is also increasing. So this particular phase is known as a follicular phase. The estrogen is influencing this phase, so it is known as the estrogenic phase. In this particular phase, the follicles are stimulating, so follicular phase. The endometrium is regenerating by proliferation, so it is known as a proliferating phase. So this is all about the follicular phase. After follicular phase, the ovulatory phase. In this phase, the rupture of the follicle and the release of the gametes takes place. How so? Hormonal influence. The estrogen secreted in the previous phase, or I can say the follicular phase, the estrogen secreted by the developing follicle in the follicular phase will stimulate the anterior pituitary. The estrogen secreted by the developing follicle has a positive feedback. So this estrogen secreted in the previous phase or the follicular phase stimulated the anterior pituitary for the secretion of the LH and FSH, due to which the LH and FSH attains a peak level. There is a rise in FSH and LH level. So FSH also attains peak and LH also attains peak. But we basically mainly talk about the LH. So the peak level attained by the FSH and LH in the middle of cycle, that is about the 14th day. So after the pre-ovulatory phase, we can see that in this particular diagram, the 14th day, on the 14th day, the level of FSH and LH increases to the maximum. So FSH level and LH, the LH level and the FSH level, this LH will lead to the peak, it will attain the peak value. FSH also attains the peak value, but comparatively lower than the LH. So due to the estrogen secretion in the previous phase of the follicular phase, stimulate the anterior pituitary for the secretion of LH, FSH, due to which the LH and FSH attains a peak value in the middle of cycle about 14th day. What does this LH affects, or what does this LH influence on the ovarian cycle? The peak value of the LH surge induces the rupturing of the Graafian follicle. So the LH surge will lead to the ovulation. LH surge will stimulate the ovary, stimulate the rupturing of the Graafian follicle from the ovary, thereby releasing the gamete, and it is known as a ovulation. So ovarian changes because of the LH surge, and now the released gamete reaches the ampulla of the fallopian tube and expected to get fertilized. It will wait there until the sperms arrives. So uterine changes, the uterine wall became more thick. So during this particular period, we can see this particular pink color part, where the pink color area is known as the ovulatory phase. In this phase, we can see the estrogen secretion from the follicular phase has a positive feedback on the FSH and LH. So due to increase in this estrogen, it will lead to increase in the level of LH and FSH. So estrogen will bring about the peak value of LH, and that is known as a LH surge. This particular peak value is known as a LH surge. This is known as a LH surge, and this LH surge will lead to this LH will goes to the ovary. The peak value of LH, the highest amount of LH, will lead ovary to release the gamete. This process is known as a ovulation. This process is known as a ovulation. So that is why this phase is known as the ovulatory phase. So LH surge will lead the rupture of follicles, and this rupture of follicle will lead to the release of a gamete. This release of gamete will went to the fallopian tube for the expected fertilization. Now the changes in the uterine wall. So here also we can see the amount of estrogen is increasing. So this estrogen will bring about the increase in the thickness of the uterine wall. So the uterine wall become more thick than the previous phase, than it was in the previous phase. So in the follicular phase, the uterine wall is proliferating and increasing in thickness, but in the ovulatory phase, the thickness of uterine wall become more thick. So thickening of endometrium, the more thickness of the endometrium is seen in this phase. Now after that, the post-ovulatory phase, luteal phase, secretory phase, or progesteronic phase. In this phase, in an ideal menstrual cycle of 28 days, this phase usually includes the cycle days between 15 to 28 days. So around 15 to 28, from 15 to 28 days, around 14 days time period, Around 15 to 28 days, what we can see, we are having a post-ovulatory cycle. Now, hormonal influence. During 15 to 23rd day, it has high level of progesterone and comparatively mild level of estrogen. Means the amount of progesterone is much more than the estrogen. So 15 to 23rd day, corpus luteum was there, and it has a high level of progesterone. It secretes, the corpus luteum has been formed and is secreting the progesterone and estrogen. So the level considerably reduced between the 23rd to 28th day. So up to the 23rd day, the corpus luteum will form and will mature. So the progesterone and estrogen amount which was released by the corpus luteum also increases. But after the 23rd day, if the pregnancy does not occur, the amount of estrogen and progesterone decreases, because the corpus luteum also degenerate after the 9 days. The amount of GnRH, FSH and LH reduce significantly throughout the phase. So in this phase, the amount of GnRH, hypothalamic and the gonadotrophins are reduces significantly. Now we come to the ovarian changes. After ovulation, the rupture of Graafian follicle ultimately transform into the corpus luteum. This corpus luteum releases large amount of progesterone and comparatively small amount of estrogen. This combination of progesterone and estrogen secreted by the corpus luteum has a negative feedback, so it inhibits the further secretion of GnRH from the hypothalamus and FSH and LH, from the hypothalamus and FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary. So this is because of this combination, this is because of the negative feedback of this combination, the amount of GnRH, FSH and LH decrease throughout the cycle. This combination of progesterone and estrogen will inhibit the secretions of the GnRH, FSH and LH. So that is why I have already told you that in this particular cycle, the amount of GnRH, FSH and LH reduces significantly because of the negative feedback of the progesterone and estrogen. We will come to the diagram after this. The ovarian changes. After this ovarian changes, what are the changes influenced by the progesterone? So in the uterus, the high level of progesterone stimulate the uterine gland. The uterine wall, the endometrium is also having certain glands which are known as the uterine glands. It stimulates the uterine glands, and whenever the glands is stimulated, these glands start secreting some substances. So the high level of progesterone stimulating the uterine glands, making the endometrium secretory in nature. So the secretory nature of endometrium is because of the progesterone. This progesterone also responsible for the maintenance of the endometrium. So the progesterone also maintains the endometrium. So that is also known as a pregnancy maintaining hormone or the pregnancy hormone. Thickness of the uterine wall is maximum on 23rd to 23rd day. Such endometrium is necessary for the pregnancy. Now, why the thickness is maximum? Because on the 23rd and 22nd day, the corpus luteum is fully matured. So a fully matured corpus luteum is also secreting the maximum amount of progesterone and estrogen. So when the amount of progesterone and estrogen is maximum, the wall of a uterus, the thickness of the uterine wall is also maximum. During the pregnancy, all events of the menstrual cycle stops and there is no menstruation. This already we have talked about. During the pregnancy, female already is having the fertilized egg inside her body, and that is developing and growing till the 9 months. So during that period, female does not need any more gamete. So due to that, the corpus luteum is giving the corpus luteum during the pregnancy is maintained for the 9 months, and the corpus luteum is giving the negative feedback to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. So if the corpus luteum is maintained for the 9 months, the negative feedback from the progesterone and estrogen combination also maintained for the 9 months. So that is why there is no FSH and LH for the 9 months. So there is no stimulation of any follicles for the 9 months, and hence no ovulation for the 9 months. If there is no ovulation, there is no menstruation also. So menstrual cycle stops because of the pregnancy. The absence of pregnancy results in the slow degeneration of the corpus luteum. If the pregnancy was not there, the corpus luteum is not being maintained for the 9 months. So after the 9 days, corpus luteum start degenerating. That I have already told you in the folliculogenesis, that the fate of corpus luteum depends on two things: pregnancy. If the pregnancy is there, the corpus luteum is maintained for the 9 months. If the pregnancy is not there, the corpus luteum is not maintained for the 9 months. So it will start degenerating after the 9th day. So in the absence of pregnancy, this results in the slow degeneration of the corpus luteum into a corpus albicans, that is a dead tissue which do not release any hormone. So ultimately, the corpus luteum, when degenerating into the corpus albicans, the secretion of the estrogen and progesterone level also reduces from the corpus luteum in the late phase of the cycle. So that is why I have already told you that. So that is why I have told you that the amount of estrogen and progesterone level considerably reduce between 23rd to 28 days if the pregnancy does not occur. So, and will lead to the degeneration of the endometrium. If the progesterone is not there, nobody is there to maintain the endometrium, because progesterone hormone is maintaining the endometrium. The progesterone also responsible for the maintenance of the endometrium. But if the corpus luteum degenerated, then this will lead to the lower amount of progesterone. The lower level of progesterone will lead to the degeneration of the endometrium, ultimately results in the menstruation. So this is how the maximum thickness of the endometrium on the 22nd and the 23rd day. So the last cycle from after the ovulatory phase, we will take this as a post ovulatory phase or the progesteronic phase, or we can call it the luteal or the secretory phase. During this phase, I have told you that after the ovulation, the corpus luteum start forming, and this corpus luteum will be mature up to the this particular 22 or 23rd day. After the 9th day, the developing corpus luteum will be fully developed after the 9 days. When this corpus luteum was present, when this corpus luteum was formed, the corpus luteum is responsible for the formation of the progesterone and estrogen hormones. So that is why the amount of progesterone increases and amount of estrogen again increases. But the level of estrogen is not as much higher than the progesterone. So high amount of progesterone and the less amount of estrogen is released by the corpus luteum in the post-ovulatory phase. Now, this progesterone and estrogen combination has a negative feedback, has an inhibitory effect on the pituitary hormones. So that is why when the progesterone and estrogen combination, these are having a negative feedback. So that is why the FSH and the LH amount start decreasing. So that is why in this cycle, in this phase, throughout the phase, the amount of GnRH, FSH and LH is low level, is at the low level. Now, the progesterone is responsible for the maintenance of the endometrial wall. So during that period, this estrogen and progesterone, this will form the endometrium, and this will lead to the maintenance of the endometrium. When the progesterone level is highest, at that time the thickness of the wall is highest. So this is the maximum thickness, which is seen at around 22nd to 23rd day of the cycle. After 22nd to 23rd day, or I can say after the 9th day of the ovulation, we can calculate from 14 to 23, there are 9 days. After these 9 days, the corpus luteum, if the pregnancy does not occur, during the normal menstruation, the pregnancy does not occur, so the particular corpus luteum start degeneration after the 9 days. So when the corpus luteum start degenerating into a corpus albicans, so the amount of progesterone and estrogen again decreases. So they also decrease. Because of the decrement in the amount of progesterone, estrogen, the endometrium also sheds off, or endometrium thickness is also reduced. So that is why from the next menstrual cycle, again the next cycle begins with the menstruation phase, and due to that, because there is no corpus luteum, the particular progesterone hormone level is low and the endometrium is not maintained. So this will lead to the bleeding of the particular endometrial wall. So this is all about the menstrual cycle. Now after the menstrual cycle, we will come to the next, fertilization. So this is another event in the human reproduction. Fertilization, the most important event of the human reproduction, the process of the fusion of a male and a female gametes. The male gamete is known as a sperm, the female gamete is known as a ovum. So it is a process of fusion of a male and female gamete and results in the formation of a diploid zygote known as a fertilization. So fertilization is a process in which the male gamete and female gamete fuses to form a diploid zygote. So this is known as a fertilization. Fertilization can only occur if the ovum and sperms are transported simultaneously to the ampullary stomach junction. This is the reason why not all copulation leads to the fertilization and pregnancy. It means this is particular diagram. These are the fallopian tube, we can see, and this is the uterine cavity. This is, we can see, the ampullary part, and this is the ovary. If this ovary is releasing a gamete, this particular gamete is released and fill from this fimbriae, it will reaches the particular ampulla. So if the gamete was placed, if the female gamete was placed there during that time before the degeneration of this female gamete, because this will not last for the lifetime. Once the gamete was there, it will last for another 2 days. So during that period, if the sperm are transported, if sperm are inseminated in the female vagina, the sperms will reach this particular gamete, will reach the female gamete and fuses in this particular ampullary structure. So at the ampulla or at the ampullary stomach junction, the fusions takes place. So it wants to say that if the fertilization can only occur if the ovum and sperm, if the male and female gamete simultaneously transported to the particular junction, means if once the female gamete degenerates, if the female gametes get degenerate, if this get degenerate and if the sperm reaches particular structure, it will not find any other gamete to get fused. So the sperm has to reach the particular ampulla or ampullary stomach junction only when there was already a gamete placed, only there is a female gamete already placed. So in that time, if the both gamete was present there at the particular time, these will fuse and this will form the diploid zygote and will lead to the fertilization. Sometimes it is seen that the sperm was there but the ovum was not there, and sometimes the ovum was there but the sperm cannot able to reach there, sperm was not there. So if only one gamete is there, the fertilization is not complete and the pregnancy or the pregnancy will not continue. So this is the reason why not all copulation, all the sexual activities, intercourses never lead to the fertilization. So in order to get pregnant, in order to get fertilization, both the gametes should reach the site at a particular time. Simultaneously they should reach the particular site. Now mechanism of the fertilization: movement of sperms towards the secondary oocyte. So first step is the movement of sperm toward the secondary oocyte. Penetration of corona redita, zona pellucida by releasing the sperm lysins present in the acrosome of a sperm, providing passage to the secondary oocyte. So this is the second stage. We already know that this is the particular secondary oocyte. This secondary oocyte, after this, the external boundary, that is the zona pellucida, and outside the zona pellucida there occur certain cells which are known as the corona radiata cells. So in order to get fused with this secondary oocyte, any sperm has to cross these two layers, the corona radiata layer and the red layer that is known as the zona pellucida. In order to fuse with this secondary oocyte, the sperm has to penetrate these two layers. So after penetrating these two layers, the zona pellucida, the sperm fuse with the plasma membrane of a secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte is a cell, and cell is having the outermost covering that is known as the plasma membrane. So after penetrating these two layers, the sperm reaches the membrane of the secondary oocyte and fuse with that plasma membrane. When the sperm fuse with the plasma membrane, the oocyte, the secondary oocyte, which is bigger in the structure, and the sperm is smaller in the structure. So it seems like the secondary oocyte has phagocytosis the sperm. So the phagocytosis of the sperms takes place by the secondary oocyte. Due to this phagocytosis, basically two events that we can understand. The completion of the meiosis II resulting in the formation of the ovum and the second polar body. We have already said that the second meiotic division only completes if the sperm arrives. If the sperm does not arrive, the gamete will degenerate in the secondary oocyte stage, arrested in the metaphase 2 of the meiosis II. So if the sperm arrives, this particular cycle begins and the second meiotic division completes, and the secondary oocyte will convert into the ovum and the second polar body. So the phagocytosis of a sperm, it means the sperm has penetrated the ovum. So the phagocytosis of a sperm leads to the completion of that meiosis II, which was arrested in the metaphase 2. I have told you during the oogenesis process. So the completion of the meiosis II resulting in the formation of a ovum and a second polar body. This will lead to the formation of the ovum and the second polar body. Now the second change which brings about by the phagocytosis of a sperm is, this phagocytosis of a sperm also bring about certain structural changes in the outer membrane, that is zona pellucida, through the cortical reaction, that is discharge of cortical granules in extracellular space. There is a space out of this cell. This particular secondary oocyte is a cell, and out of this cell and between the zona pellucida there is a space present. This space which is present between the zona pellucida and the secondary oocyte is known as the extracellular space that blocks the entry of additional sperm, preventing polyspermy. It ensures that only one sperm can fertilize ovum. Now, what does that mean? This particular sentence I want to say you. Structural changes in the zona pellucida through the cortical reaction, that is discharge of cortical granules in the extracellular space. It means that this secondary oocyte is having certain granules present inside itself, and when the sperm penetrated, these granules will come outside in this extracellular space. So when these granules will come outside in the extracellular space, these granules will form an extra layer between the zona pellucida and the plasma membrane of a particular gamete. Now, after the formation of this gamete, the other sperm which wants to penetrate the ovum, cannot be able to cross this particular yellow layer which was formed because of the cortical granules. So these sperms cannot be able to penetrate the ovum. That is why it is preventing the polyspermy, means entry of many sperm. Poly means many. So this layer is preventing the entry of additional sperm or the other sperms or many sperms inside the ovum. It ensures that only one sperm can fertilize the ovum. So the first sperm that was phagocytosis, that is entering inside the secondary oocyte, will lead to the fertilization. Rest other sperm will be wasted. Now, after formation of the ovum, the nucleus of the sperm fuses with the nucleus of the ovum, and when both the nucleus fuses, they will resulting in the formation of a diploid zygote. So the formation of a diploid zygote will lead to the fertilization. Now, this is the structural diagram. This is the sperm which is going towards the first step. It is showing the sperm is going towards the secondary oocyte. This is the wall, this is the membrane of the secondary oocyte. Or I can say this, I can make it like this. This is the plasma membrane of the secondary oocyte. This is the oocyte plasma membrane. This is the plasma membrane of the secondary oocyte. Now, this sperm is moving towards the first step is moving of the sperm towards the ovum. Now, towards the secondary oocyte. Now, in the second step, it penetrates the corona radiata. In the third step, it is penetrating this particular zona pellucida by releasing the sperm lysins. Due to this sperm lysin, it can penetrate the zona pellucida. After the zona pellucida, there occurs a space that is known as the extracellular space, which is present between the plasma membrane of the secondary oocyte and the zona pellucida. This is known as the extracellular space present between the zona pellucida and the plasma membrane. So this extracellular space present between these two layers. Now, when the first sperm enter inside, it will cross the extracellular space and will reach to the plasma membrane of the ovum. When it reaches the plasma membrane of the secondary oocyte, this plasma after this, the secondary oocyte will get converted into the ovum and the second polar body. So the fusion of oocyte and the sperm plasma membrane. After the fusion, the second particular changes that what it brings is when the sperm enter the plasma membrane, when it enters the secondary oocyte, it brings about the cortical reaction. What is cortical reaction? So we can see from here that there are certain granules which are present inside the plasma membrane. These small granules we can see. When the first sperm enter inside the ovum, it will bring about the cortical reaction. And in this cortical reaction, it degranulate these granules. So these particular vesicles will burst out after the entering of this sperm, and due to the bursting of these particular cortical granules vesicles, the cortical granules get released into this extracellular space. So when this particular granules, this blue color vesicle rupture, and it will release its gamete inside this extracellular space. When it releases this particular granules in this extracellular space, these granules will form another layer of the cortical granules between zona pellucida and the plasma membrane. So what does it affect? Now, if an additional sperm want to enter this particular ovum, it will cross the corona radiata, it can cross the zona pellucida, but when it reaches the extracellular space, it will find another layer that is made up of the cortical granules, and this layer of cortical granules would not allow this gamete, this particular sperm, to enter inside the secondary oocyte if any one sperm has already penetrated the ovum. So after the penetration of ovum by the first sperm, the ovum the particular cortical granules will not lead any other sperms to enter inside the ovum. So this is preventing the entry of any more sperm, means it is preventing the polyspermy. So this sperm will do not enter and it will remain outside the ovum. So this is all about the fertilization.